Two trades the New Orleans Saints could look to pull off to lighten the potential loss of Terron Armstead, more cap space gymnastics, and the two most important in-house free agents we're not talking enough about. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into this Friday episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks as always for making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we are free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson NOLA on Twitter, USA Today's Saints Wire, Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And I want to kick off today's episode with two potential trades the New Orleans Saints could pull off to help lighten the load if they do indeed lose Terron Armstead to free agency next week. Now, free agency gets underway next week officially, starting with the legal tampering period earlier on in the week. And then on the 16th, Wednesday, then things officially open up with the new league year beginning. So at that point, Terron Armstead, the Saints' cornerstone left tackle, is expected to at least test free agency, right? There'll be the legal tampering period that'll start up early in the week. That'll give the Saints some time to maybe get an idea of what his market is like and then see what it is that they're able to come up with to try to combat some of those markets. But a lot of estimations out there are saying that Armstead is going to pull in more than $22 million per year on average, which is going to be a little bit tough, of course, for the New Orleans Saints to compete with. So are there other options out there? Now, in yesterday's episode, we broke down the way that the Saints could get creative with the players that they already have in the building and maybe with some free agent additions. Now, let's talk about two trades the Saints could potentially pull off that would help them either immediately at left tackle or make it a little bit easier with that shift that we continuously talk about, which would be taking Ryan Ramczyk from right tackle and moving him over to left tackle. Now, there have been some reservations around that idea because there's a belief that there's this massive incentive in Ryan Ramczyk's contract if he plays at left tackle. But the fact of the matter is that it's a $1 million per year for future years incentive based upon whether or not Ryan Ramczyk gets first or second team all pro. So it's not necessarily just about playing tackle. It's not necessarily, or left tackle. It's not necessarily about playing a certain percentage of snaps at left tackle, anything like that. It's about getting first or second team all pro. And then you're talking about, at this point, a year into his new contract, a maximum of $5 million extra that goes into his total lifetime of his deal. I think that that's fine, right? Like, you'll take that, no problem. So where could the New Orleans Saints potentially help themselves in the trade market? Let's say first without having to move Ryan Ramczyk from right to left, because there are some current concerns with that, right? You're asking him to mirror and do things over on the opposite side of his body, start taking his, it switches everything. You're coming off of, the opposite foot that you're accustomed to, all these other things. Everything you're doing is reversed from what he's been doing since he came into the league in 2017. So I can understand some of the reservations there. Ramczyk is talented enough, though, to make that switch. But if you didn't want to do that, one immediate way that you could address the left tackle position is to make a trade with the Philadelphia Eagles. And this was actually brought up by a Philadelphia Eagles writer that I think is a very, very good trade. And it's actually just a player for player trade. Now, Andre Dillard has been the talk of, trade talks around Philadelphia for quite some time. He's been in the NFL for 2 years. He's played kind of on and off, but he's been stuck behind guys like Mailata, as well as some of the other offensive tackles that are there, and hasn't really gotten the opportunity to ever step into a full-time starting role. So this is coming from Dave Zingaro, one of the writers over in Philadelphia, who proposed a player-for-player trade because of how much Dillard has just kind of been in that trade market. And it's very, it's very GM, Philadelphia Eagles GM to do something like this, right? To do a player-for-player trade. And the Saints have done this before, and they've done it at the linebacker position before. Remember, they brought Kiko Alonso from Miami with a player-for-player trade that included Vince Beagle. So in this instance, it would be the Saints receiving Andre Dillard from the Philadelphia Eagles in exchange for a linebacker, Zach Bond. And I think that would be a smart trade by the New Orleans Saints. Zach Bond has yet to really develop into what the New Orleans Saints do in their system, and honestly doesn't feel like very much of a fit for the New Orleans Saints defense. Speed rusher is not really a part of their style. He hasn't really been able to transition into a coverage linebacker, which was part of why they drafted him, because of some of that coverage ability he showed you at the Senior Bowl as well as throughout his career at Wisconsin. And the Saints don't really use Sam linebackers very much. So if that's the role that they see him in, he's not really seeing the field very much. And instead, you've seen Zach Bond kind of fall behind Caden Ellis in that role in certain cases. So if you look at a team like Philadelphia, who uses a third linebacker, and particularly strong side linebackers, much more than the New Orleans Saints do, Zach Bond would be a much better fit in Philadelphia than he is in New Orleans. And New Orleans would be able to return Andre Dillard, who could plug in at left tackle. He's only 2 years into his career. He has some development to do. He has dealt with some injuries, but so has Terron Armstead. And he's not, 30 years old like Terron Armstead is. So and he's still on a rookie deal, which is really, really nice for New Orleans as well. So that is one way that the Saints could do that while keeping Ryan Ramczyk at right tackle. If you're okay with moving Ryan Ramczyk to left tackle and you want to go with somebody who's maybe got more NFL seasoning underneath his belt, and that fits into your zone run scheme, much like Andre Dillard would, by the way, just in Philadelphia's system, you could look at former LSU Tiger and current Dallas Cowboy Lael Collins. Lael Collins has played last year in 2019. He played in 13 games. Ryan Ramczyk at the same position played 10 games. We saw them come in pretty close to one another in terms of snap shares when it comes to zone run versus man run. You saw Lael Collins just over 49% there. You saw Ryan Ramczyk just over 52% there. Both of them grading highly in the zone run game, and both of them in the top 10 in the NFL at tackle when it comes to run blocking grades from Pro Football Focus as well. So they're not too far a venture from one another in the run game. It's there's a gap there in terms of the passing game, but they're not too far of a venture from one another in the run game. If you're okay with trading for Lael Collins, you'll need to restructure his contract, but we'll talk about that quickly here in a second. Plugging him in at right tackle and then moving Ryan Ramczyk over to protect the blind side, or what we would assume would be the blind side, assuming that the Saints draft a right-handed quarterback or have a right-handed quarterback in 2022. So that would be another route that they could go to make up for the potential loss of Terron Armstead. The contract for Lael Collins is begging to be restructured. It's $10 million flat in terms of base salary over the next 3 years. You restructure that, take some off the top of it, which is going to be just under $9 million. You're going to spread that out into a signing bonus over the 3 years of his career. You could add, or remaining of his contract, you could add void years to that to knock that down even further. But even if you don't add the void years, you're still saving around $6 million from his original price tag, and you're paying, just under $4 million or just over $4 million for that price tag. And I think you'll take that for a starter at right tackle that fits the zone run scheme, that has the athleticism, that has the mobility, and then you have the safety net of being able to move Ryan Ramczyk over to left tackle. So losing Terron Armstead is going to be tough, right? He's a cornerstone of the New Orleans Saints offensive line. He's a cornerstone of the New Orleans Saints organization. So if the New Orleans Saints lose him to free agency, as many of us expect, it stinks. But there are a lot of ways to either bandage or even in some cases maybe replace the production that you've gotten from Terron Armstead with a mixture of some of the players that are already in the building for you, like Ryan Ramczyk, like James Hurst, but then also you could go outside of the facility and bring somebody in via trade. A little bit of work you would have to do, but you could get somebody in free agency. And of course, the draft is just overflowing with a ton of trench talent. So it's not the worst year in the world to lose Terron Armstead. It's bad to lose Terron Armstead, but there are certainly worse classes to do it in. Now, speaking of restructuring contracts and salary cap maneuverability, we're seeing more and more of it as the New Orleans Saints get closer and closer and are now very much in striking distance, maybe 1 or 2 moves away from getting salary cap compliant under the NFL's limit. So let's talk about the move that they made this morning, what they did, how they did it, and what it means for the New Orleans Saints moving forward. We've got all that coming up for you here in just a moment as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. But first, hey, it's college basketball season, college basketball tournaments right around the corner. It's the best time of the year to get in on some gambling, some betting, some fun. So for all the latest odds, lines, and props when it comes to the big tournament, March Madness, in just a couple of weeks, BetOnline is the #1 source for all of your sports betting needs and info. BetOnline is the best place for all of your sports scores, your sports podcasts, your news that you're looking for all throughout the season when it comes to sports betting. And it's not just basketball. Over at betonline.ag, you've got hockey. Baseball is back, baby. You've got baseball on the way as well. And there's a bunch of live betting as well as your favorite Vegas casino games as well. So head over to the website today on your laptop, your desktop, or your mobile device so you can learn more about all the trends and action. It's over at betonline.net, where the game starts. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks as always, making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out that Locked On NFL YouTube channel. Local experts on the biggest stories from a national scale, all in less than 30 minutes, giving you everything you need to know around the NFL. Find it on your favorite Vegas casino games, your favorite podcast, as well as on YouTube as well. And of course, we are on YouTube also here, giving you everything you need to know around your New Orleans Saints, as well as on all of your favorite podcast providers every Monday through Friday. So thanks, as always, for making me a part of your day. And I just want to quickly shout out Locked On Pelicans. Jake Madison, go listen to the podcast. Simple. Nice and simple. So much going on with the Pelicans. Go and listen to the podcast. All right. So I want to talk a little bit real quick now about the restructure of Alvin Kamara's contract, because it tells us a couple of different things, right? So it helps with the New Orleans Saints salary cap. It is a team-friendly move, obviously, that helps that happen, but it's also a player-friendly move. So let's talk about how this all breaks down. So New Orleans Saints restructured Alvin Kamara's contract this morning. It ended up saving over $8 million. We don't have to get into the nitty-gritty of it, but just know that it took his cap hit from $14.5 million all the way down to basically like 6-point-some-odd million dollars. So that ends up dropping it quite a bit, making about $8.37 million in salary cap space. Really, really good stuff for the New Orleans Saints. That gets them to somewhere in between $20 to $25 million over the cap. You know that you've got Marshawn Lattimore's contract you can still restructure, Taysom Hill's, Demario Davis, David Onyemata, still a lot of different ways that you can go. And honestly, just doing Marshawn Lattimore's takes about 3/4, maybe even more than that, maybe 4/5 of that overage out, because it's $18 million that you can get from that restructure at max. And then you have, Taysom Hill maybe, who gets you around $7-8 million. And so that ends up clearing up the rest of your cap space. Everything after that's lanyap, right? Everything after that is opening up spending for the team. They'll have to make a decision on Bradley Roby as well. So there's a lot of different ways they continue to make money. But the thing about this Alvin Kamara restructure is that it shows you how the New Orleans Saints planned for all of this, right? This whole idea of being $76 million over the salary cap. I've continuously talked about how it's not like the Saints wake up in March and go, oh my God, we're how far over the salary cap? Like, they plan for this. They have mechanisms for this. And one of the mechanisms that I always talk about is roster bonuses, which are already guaranteed money once you're on the roster at a certain point, right? So that might be the 5th day of the league year, the 2nd day of the league year, whatever it is. That money becomes guaranteed. It's a bonus. It pays out to the player. So what the Saints have done more operationally here recently is that they're agreeing on roster bonuses that are a little bit higher. $6 million for Alvin Kamara, $10 million, $15 million on some players, as a means of saying, okay, this is money that's already guaranteed. It's money that's already on the books no matter what. We cut you, it's dead money, right? It doesn't matter. And it's not base salary then that they're restructuring. It's already guaranteed money that they're guaranteeing 7 days earlier and saving themselves $6 million in the long run. It's a really, really unique and it's unique, right? We've really only seen the Saints doing this over the course of the last couple of years, but it's really unique and it's a really good strategy because you're not taking base salary that might be non-guaranteed and all of a sudden committing new guaranteed money. You're just taking already guaranteed money that's in the form of a roster bonus and switching it over to a signing bonus like 6 or 7 days ahead of schedule and then saving millions of dollars in doing so. It's a really, really smart structure that the New Orleans Saints have started building into contracts. So when you see new contracts signed over the course of this offseason, keep an eye on the roster bonus number. If there's a roster bonus number in 2 or 3 years, it's a pretty good indicator that the Saints are ready to restructure that deal in the near future. If Marcus Davenport gets an extension, for instance, that would be a place to watch that because in that extension would be built in that, potentially double-digit millions of dollars of roster bonus. So a good move by the New Orleans Saints. But as I mentioned, it's not just a team-friendly move, opening up a bunch of salary cap space. It's also a player-friendly move. Alvin Kamara was arrested last month, February 6th, Pro Bowl, in Las Vegas after an alleged altercation that took place early in the morning. And so when you look at the Saints restructuring the contract, that effectively giving him the money up front, which actually usually gets paid out still weekly over the course of 17 weeks, things like that, maybe 18 weeks now that it's an 18-week schedule, you're guaranteeing Alvin Kamara that he's going to get his money for the season, even if he ends up suspended for upwards of 6 games, that he's still going to get paid out. Now, his court hearing for this battery case has moved. It is now April 25th. So it was set for early in March. They asked for it to be delayed. So, obviously they're working on something and we'll see how all that pans out. Hopefully Alvin Kamara doesn't miss 6 games in 2022. That would certainly be detrimental to the New Orleans Saints. But at least what the New Orleans Saints are showing him is that, hey, we know that this happened. You're still getting your money. you're not about to lose out on anything here. And that's really important because in some contracts, I don't know if it's in Alvin Kamara's, but in some contracts, a suspension gives teams the ability to take away guaranteed money. It was one of the reasons why the language around Michael Thomas being sat versus Michael Thomas being suspended with the practice altercation was so important, because it kind of lets you know whether or not they were in the midst of potentially messing with his money. And so a restructure after an altercation like this that you know could potentially lead to a suspension kind of tells the player, hey, you're still getting your guaranteed money here. And in fact, we're guaranteeing you more money. So here you go. So it's an interesting thing that the New Orleans Saints did. And I think it's something that goes a long way with the player to organization interaction and the player to organization relationship. For the New Orleans Saints, when it comes to contract restructures, things like that remain, one of the things that was really interesting to see, just because we have a little bit of extra time to talk about this, was how the New Orleans Saints went about the recent restructures with defensive ends, Kpassagnon and Cam Jordan. Now, we talked yesterday about Cam Jordan's restructure, basically guaranteeing, all but effectively guaranteeing, that he would finish his career as a New Orleans Saint the way that he wanted to. But then they also kept in the building exclusive rights free agents in Carl Granderson as well as Jalen Dalton. When they took up, or when they re-signed Carl Granderson, they re-signed him to sort of that minimum deal that's, $800 some odd $1,000. But then they also gave him a second year on his deal that is about $4.3 million, which is equivalent to what a restricted free agent second round tender would be. So that's interesting to see, because that's basically the Saints committing to Carl Granderson in 2023, which gives them some wiggle room in case they don't want to move forward with a guy like Marcus Davenport after the season. It means that they don't have to extend Marcus Davenport this year. They could wait and see how he plays in 2022 and then commit to him after that, or commit to him at some point during the season like they did with Demario Davis, like they did with Marshall Lattimore. It just kind of slows the clock a little bit for the need on that, because then they have these other players that they feel very comfortable with. And then, of course, you have Peyton Turner, who hopefully is able to be a little bit more healthy in his second year, things like that. So interesting to sort of see the way that the Saints are going to be balancing that defensive end position in terms of the future of it, knowing that you've got Cam Jordan in the building for a little while longer, you've got Tanoh Kpassagnon, you've got Carl Granderson, and then you'll probably have some other names that will join the fold. And of course, you have Peyton Turner, plus those other names that could potentially join the fold later on. And so it just gives you some time before having to make this big decision on Marcus Davenport, which I think could be smart. And it doesn't mean that they'll wait until next offseason, right? They don't want him to go out there and Trey Hendrickson himself and then have 13 and a half sacks and then not be able to be re-signed, right? But it does give you a little bit of wiggle room to wait until week 1, week 2, when the finances are all in order, and then you're starting to bring people back on non-guaranteed contracts post week 1. Those are the things that end up really, really mattering in terms of team building and getting your roster ready for the weeks 2 through 18 stretch. So lots of interesting things going on with the New Orleans Saints, as we knew that there would be, and not the least of which being some of the in-house players that they still might be looking to retain before free agency opens up next week. Deonte Hardy, PJ Williams, two really, really important players that we haven't really talked much about. The focus has been so much on Terron Armstead, it's been on Marcus Williams, but these other two players, just as vital to the success of the offense and defense going into 2022 as people that are familiar, people that can serve multiple roles, and people that can make plays. Let's talk about Deonte Hardy, PJ Williams a little bit more as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Before we get to it, it's our friends, Built Bar, best tasting protein bar on the market. Don't know how they do it, but they continue to do it. And they always do it. And they do it very well. They give you the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, but it's much better for you than a candy bar. We're talking about 4 or 5 grams of sugar as compared to 240 grams of sugar. We're talking about, barely any calories, 130, 150 calories as compared to like 300 calories. And we're talking about 4 grams of net carbs as opposed to dozens of net carbs in candy bars. And the best thing about this is that it's also a protein bar that's giving you 17, 18 grams of protein as well. And if you haven't heard of the Built Puffs yet, what are you doing? What are you doing? Protein-infused marshmallows, y'all. Built Bar cracked the code. They broke in the matrix. They did the whole thing. I mean, it's ridiculous. And the way that they do this is that they focus on making something that tastes good first, and then they make it healthy, right? They tone back the sugar. They pick up the protein. Then they cover it in 100% chocolate just to seal the deal. Every one of these bars is covered in 100% chocolate. Yes, even the Built Puffs, as well as all the standard flavors that you already know and love: mint brownie, peanut butter brownie, coconut and almond, so on and so forth. You know I love them. So you love them. Or if you haven't tried them yet, go ahead and fall in love with them by heading over to Built.com. Use that promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED15, so you can get 15% off. That's 15% off with the promo code LOCKED15 over at Built.com. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a quick look at two very important in-house free agents that I just don't feel like we've talked enough about. That's Deonte Hardy, wide receiver and return specialist, as well as defensive back PJ Williams. Now, we talked about PJ Williams in the context of replacing Marcus Williams, right? We've talked about Deonte Hardy in the context of what the wide receiver room could look like in 2022. But what we haven't talked about is just the value that these guys bring. And I want to start off with Deonte Hardy because there's something that could shift with him with Cody Burns, right? The usage of him in the passing game, all of that. Cody Burns had a wide receiver in Auburn named Anthony Schwartz, who was like a 100-meter star. He was somebody incredibly fast. He was, 6'1", still 6'1", but he came in pretty light at 175, 180 pounds, somewhere around there while he was in college. But he was a deep threat. He was a field stretcher. He was all of those things. But what Cody Burns did with him is that he sort of changed the route collection that he ran. As opposed to him just being a 9 guy, they used him in a couple of other situations, crossing patterns, these sort of over routes that are kind of like, think about like a deep in route, but that's curved off so that you're rounding out between the linebackers and the safeties, right? And you're coming across the field that way. More post routes, more corner routes, things like that. So it just kind of diversified his route tree a little bit. We talked about sort of the comparison between Traquan Smith and Darius Slayton and what Cody Burns did with him, which is targeting him more downfield. Kind of the other part that he did with Anthony Schwartz was really just diversified his route tree and helped him become more of a yards after catch guy. And if you look at Deonte Hardy, what we saw from him last year with Jameis was his ability to take the top off. Think about the Washington game, the Green Bay game. But we also saw, thinking about the Dallas Cowboys game, opportunities where Deonte had real chances to make something happen with the ball in his hand. And this is something that we've sort of seen back in the days of Deonte Harris, before it was Deonte Hardy. And he talked, and we talked a little bit more about how do you turn him into a returner with the ball in his hand on offense? It's getting him the ball in space. That's why these crossing routes, these drag routes, these crossing patterns, these over patterns, things like that become so important. Because if you have a quarterback that can hit him in stride, right? Not make him reach behind him, not make him alter his course, anything like that, but hit him in stride so that he can catch a pass in stride and then immediately turn upfield. Then all of a sudden, he becomes a return man with the ball in his hand, right? And that was sort of what they started to do with Anthony Schwartz. Anthony Schwartz was very much still a field stretcher, right? He was still somebody that won on deep balls, all these other things. That's what turned him into a drafted prospect. And I think something like that with Deonte Hardy would be really, really successful as well. What we saw last year was him just simply becoming more a part of the offense. And we saw him in the short area of the field, and we saw him in the deep area of the field. Now, you're getting him more involved in his ability to be able to attack over the middle of the field could be something, or the intermediate area of the field. It doesn't have to be over the middle, right? You can catch him at the seams on those crossing patterns. And so getting him to attack in the intermediate area and hitting him in situations where he's working in stride becomes the next step for expanding his role in New Orleans Saints offense. And, look, he's 5'7". He is somebody that is a smaller receiver. And so attacking with him over the middle of the field isn't always going to work. But if you look at the days of, now I'm going to get a little big here, but you look at the days of like Percy Harvin, right? Percy Harvin was not the most statuesque wide receiver out there, but they worked him in space. And I think you need to do the same thing with Deonte Hardy. Now, you also have to keep Deonte Hardy in the building. He's a restricted free agent, so it makes it a little bit easier. And don't get me wrong, throw a second-round tender on him, a first-round tender on him, and then keep him in the building. And I was kind of hoping we would see that today. We haven't seen it yet. I'm keeping an eye out on it. Maybe we'll see it over the course of the weekend, but I don't know if you want to let Deonte Harris get to the point where he could start to hear other offers from other teams in the legal tampering period, knowing that there are other players like Jakeem Grant who might actually demand quite a bit of a contract as basically the lesser version of Deonte Harris, right? Deonte Hardy, because he's more of a return man than he is somebody that gets involved in the offense, while Deonte Hardy has begun to expand his role in offense. So I think you want to keep that number down. So you can go with the tender, and then you can extend him, give him a bigger contract, sort of go the route of Taysom Hill a few years ago. Looking at PJ Williams, who is an unrestricted free agent, he's hung around in New Orleans now on a couple of one-year cheap deals. Now, I think it's about time that you see PJ Williams get a multi-year deal. And maybe some of this is waiting to see what happens with Marcus Williams, because PJ Williams is not going to be a first, second, third day free agency guy. He's going to be a little bit later in the week. And so you have some time to see, okay, what happens with Marcus Williams during the legal tampering period? Does he agree in principle to a contract elsewhere during that time? Are you unable to match what you know he's being offered elsewhere? And then that allows you to make the decision on PJ Williams based on that. Sure. Are you waiting to see, is Tyrann Mathieu a better option for you than PJ Williams is? Maybe. It just depends upon what it is that you're wanting to do and how you're wanting to change up the defense, right? Because if you go with Tyrann Mathieu, you're probably not playing a lot of center field, cover 1, cover 3, single high safety looks. You might be playing more split safety, cover 2, cover 4 type adjustments over on the Saints defense, which would be a lack of the continuity that you fought so hard to maintain so far this season. Something I wrote about over at Saints Wire this morning. And so I don't know. I don't know exactly what the New Orleans Saints plan is, but they clearly have one. But whatever that plan is, if it is a plan that is like the insurance policy post Marcus Williams, PJ Williams should absolutely be a big focus and a big part of that. So PJ Williams becomes that next piece. We've talked about him several times, right? Being somebody that's revitalized his career from being an outside corner to a slot corner to a safety to now somebody that serves all these roles. The big piece that we should illustrate most about PJ Williams is that he is Dennis Allen's guy, right? Like he is one of Dennis Allen's guys because he's been able to do that under Dennis Allen. And Dennis Allen, the New Orleans Saints, they love the versatility. They love players that are multiple. And PJ Williams is the absolute definition of multiple in this New Orleans Saints defense because you re-sign PJ Williams, you bring him back on a multi-year deal that's not going to cost you a ton of money, right? He's not going to command top dollar. He should command more than he's been paid here recently, but he's not going to command top dollar or anything close to it. And with that, you pay for the one player and you get depth at all of these different positions. And that's one of the reasons why PJ Williams is so remarkably valuable because of all of the different positions that he can play. And maybe you're in a position where you have to choose between Bradley Roby and PJ Williams or something like that. I think they'd love to keep both. Bradley Roby's going to need to restructure that contract or take an extension or something like that, which I think, hey, you take if you're a Bradley Roby, but you're not going to be able to hang around on a $10 million cap hit, right? So 2 defensive backs that they'll need to make a decision on. But the 2 most important free agents after those top tier guys in Marcus Williams and Terron Armstead are very, very close to hitting the market. Hopefully this weekend, the New Orleans Saints can get them taken care of before they get that far down the road. On Monday, we're going to be breaking down everything that we're already starting to hear about the New Orleans Saints, their free agents, the New Orleans Saints, and all the rest of this action, right? We have seen so much action over the course of the past few days. The Wilson trade, the Wentz trade, the Khalil Mack trade, so much. Do the New Orleans Saints eventually get involved in the trade market, quarterback or otherwise? We'll see all of that, and we'll recap it all on Monday and maybe even over the weekend if something big enough happens. So you know where to stay locked every single Monday through Friday, and in some cases some more. It's right here at the Locked On Saints podcast. Thank you so much as always for making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget for your second listen today to go and check out Locked On NFL Draft. They went through some of their top 5 position lists you're going to want to hear more about, as well as Mock Draft Monday on the way on Monday, which we'll also be covering here at Locked On Saints. So I appreciate you as always making me a part of your day and a part of your routine. As always, if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between those episodes, make sure you're following on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how your family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.